You are not tired because life is heavy, but because you keep living inside other people's judgments instead of your own reason. You wake up, and your mind immediately checks voices that are not yours, and you call it normal, while your own judgment grows weaker each day. If you are ready to stop that inner drift and start governing yourself through reason and virtue, stay here with this work. And consider joining this channel, where we build the habit of self-examination together, without noise, without performance, without dependence on approval. Right now, notice how often your decisions shift when you imagine being watched, how often your peace rises and falls with opinions you cannot control. This is the point where Stoic discipline begins, not in changing the world, but in correcting the mind that reacts to it. Number 1. Recognize what lies within your control today. How much of your suffering today comes from things you cannot control? Do not answer too quickly. Sit with the question. Look carefully at your last week. Look at the moments that disturbed you. Look at the conversations that stayed in your mind long after they ended. Look at the disappointments that followed you into the night. Look at the resentment that returned each morning before you even left your bed. Now ask yourself with complete honesty, how much of that suffering came from reality itself, and how much came from your attempt to control what was never yours to control? Most people never ask this question. They spend years exhausted by battles they cannot win. They try to control how others see them. They try to control what people say about them. They try to control outcomes that depend on 1,000 causes beyond their reach. They try to control the past through regret and the future through worry. Then they wonder why peace never stays. The hard truth is simple. You cannot live a calm life while demanding authority over things that were never placed under your authority. This is where real philosophy begins. Not with theories, not with quotations, not with intellectual entertainment. It begins when a person looks directly at their own life and realizes that much of their frustration comes from confusing what belongs to them with what does not. The first task of a disciplined human being is to make this distinction. What is under your control? Your judgments, your choices, your actions, your intentions, your character. What is not under your control? The opinions of others, the actions of others, the results of your efforts, the events of the world, the past, the future. This distinction sounds simple, yet entire lives are wasted because people refuse to accept it. A person spends years trying to make everyone approve of them. A parent tries to force an adult child to think differently. An employee becomes consumed by recognition they may never receive. A partner becomes obsessed with controlling another person's feelings. A citizen spends every day angry about events beyond their influence. All of them share the same mistake. They have handed their peace to something outside themselves. And once your peace depends on something outside yourself, your life becomes unstable. You become a servant to circumstances. Your mood rises and falls with events. Your confidence rises and falls with praise. Your sense of worth rises and falls with approval. You stop governing yourself and start being governed by the world around you. This is not freedom. This is dependence. The disciplined mind understands something different. It understands that freedom begins the moment you stop demanding control over what does not belong to you. Consider how often your thoughts leave the present moment. Someone criticizes you. The words are spoken. The event ends, yet your mind continues carrying it. Hours later, you are still replaying the conversation. You imagine different responses. You imagine revenge. You imagine proving them wrong. You imagine how others may have interpreted what happened. The original event lasted a few moments. Your suffering lasted the entire day. What created the suffering? Not the criticism. Your judgment about the criticism, not the event. Your interpretation of the event. This is why attention matters. Most people watch the world, Very few watch their own mind, yet your mind is where your life is actually lived. Every experience enters through judgment. Every emotion is shaped by interpretation. Every disturbance begins with an impression that you either accept or examine. The undisciplined person believes every thought. The disciplined person questions every thought. When something happens today, pause. Do not react immediately. Do not surrender your mind to the first impulse. Ask a simple question. Is this within my control? If the answer is yes, act. If the answer is no, accept. This single habit can change an entire life. Someone insults you. Is their opinion under your control? No. What is under your control? Your response. Focus there. A plan fails. Is the outcome still under your control? No. What remains under your control? Your next action. Focus there. A person misunderstands you. Can you force understanding? No. What can you control? Speaking honestly and acting with integrity. Focus there. The mind becomes lighter when it stops carrying responsibilities that do not belong to it. Many people are exhausted not because life is difficult, but because they are carrying burdens that were never theirs. They carry the burden of managing every opinion. They carry the burden of predicting every outcome. They carry the burden of preventing every disappointment. They carry the burden of controlling people who do not wish to be controlled. No human being was designed for this task. You were given authority over yourself, not over the entire world. And yet most people spend more time managing others than governing themselves. They analyze everyone else's flaws. They discuss everyone else's failures. They complain about everyone else's behavior. Meanwhile, their own character remains neglected. A person can spend years criticizing others while never examining themselves. Such a person gains knowledge about strangers and remains ignorant of their own soul. Real strength begins when attention returns inward. Ask yourself difficult questions. Can I control this situation? Can I control this person's opinion? Can I control this outcome? Can I control the past? Can I control tomorrow? Again and again the answer will be no. Then ask a better question. What can I control right now? Now you have entered the territory where growth becomes possible. You can control whether you speak truthfully. You can control whether you act courageously. You can control whether you remain just. You can control whether you exercise self-restraint. You can control whether you meet difficulty with dignity. This is where your power exists, not in commanding events, not in commanding people, not in commanding fortune, in commanding yourself. And this command is not achieved once. It must be renewed every day. Every morning presents the same challenge. Will you govern your mind or surrender it? Will you direct your attention or scatter it? Will you examine your judgments or obey them blindly? Will you choose your actions or allow circumstances to choose for you? Each day answers these questions through your conduct, not through your intentions, not through your promises, through your actions. Many people wait for perfect conditions before changing. They say they will become disciplined when life becomes easier. They say they will become calm when problems disappear. They say they will become focused when distractions vanish. This is another attempt to control what lies outside them. Discipline does not begin when circumstances improve. Discipline begins when excuses end. The weather may be unfavorable. People may be difficult. Conditions may be imperfect. None of this removes your responsibility for your character. Your character remains yours, always. This is why adversity can become a teacher. Not because adversity is pleasant, not because suffering is desirable, but because adversity reveals where your control truly lies. When life becomes difficult, your illusions are stripped away. You discover what cannot be taken from you. You discover what remains. Your judgment remains. Your choice remains. Your ability to act with virtue remains. Your capacity for reason remains. These are your true possessions. Everything else can disappear. Wealth can disappear. Status can disappear. Praise can disappear. Comfort can disappear. Health can decline. Relationships can change. Circumstances can shift without warning. Yet the ability to choose your response remains available until your final breath. This is why character matters more than circumstance. Circumstances belong partly to fortune. Character belongs to you. Many people spend their lives decorating circumstances while neglecting character. They seek better positions, better recognition, better possessions, better appearances. Meanwhile, they leave the governing faculty of the mind untrained. Then the first serious challenge arrives and everything collapses. The person who has trained their character possesses something more durable. They possess inner authority. They know where their responsibility begins and ends. They know what deserves attention and what deserves release. They know that peace comes not from controlling events but from governing responses. This understanding requires daily practice, not occasional reflection. Daily practice. Begin each morning with a question. What is truly mine today? The answer is always the same. My judgments, my choices, my actions, my character. Nothing more, nothing less. Then prepare yourself. Expect difficulties. Expect misunderstandings. Expect delays. Expect disappointment. Not because life is cruel, because life is life. The person who expects perfection becomes angry. The person who expects reality becomes prepared. Preparation strengthens the mind. When difficulties arrive, they are recognized rather than feared. You say to yourself, this event is here. Now what part belongs to me? You separate the event from your response. You separate circumstance from character. You separate what happened from what you choose next. This pause is powerful. Most mistakes occur because people never pause. An impression arrives, a reaction follows, anger appears, words escape, damage is done. The disciplined person inserts reason between impression and action. A space opens. Within that space, freedom appears. Not freedom from circumstances, freedom from slavery to impulse. This is one of the highest forms of freedom available to a human being. To remain capable of reason when emotion demands surrender, to remain capable of choice when habit demands obedience, to remain capable of virtue when circumstances encourage vice. This freedom is earned through practice. Every day gives opportunities. A rude comment, a delay, a mistake, a disappointment, a temptation. Each one becomes training. Each one becomes an opportunity to strengthen self-command. Most people see obstacles. The disciplined person sees exercises. Life becomes a gymnasium for character. Every challenge asks the same question. Can you remain faithful to what is under your control, or will you chase what is not? The answer determines the quality of your life. Not tomorrow, today, right now. Because life is always lived in the present moment. You cannot govern yesterday. You cannot govern next year. You can govern this moment, this decision, this action, this judgment. That is where your power resides. And yet many people postpone their lives. They postpone discipline. They postpone honesty. They postpone courage. They postpone self-examination. They speak as though unlimited time has been granted to them. But look carefully at reality. Time moves whether you are prepared or not. Days disappear. Weeks disappear. Years disappear. The opportunity to govern yourself exists now, not eventually, not when conditions improve. Now, the person who understands this becomes serious about their life, not anxious, not fearful, serious. They stop wasting energy on what cannot be controlled. They stop negotiating with excuses. They stop waiting for perfect circumstances. They begin training the only thing that truly belongs to them, their character. At night, another practice awaits. Examine your day. Do not condemn yourself. Do not flatter yourself. Examine yourself honestly. Where did I focus on what was beyond my control? Where did I surrender my peace unnecessarily? Where did I react instead of choosing? Where did I act according to reason? Where did I fail? Where did I improve? This examination is essential. A life without examination drifts. A life with examination develops direction. You become both student and teacher. You become accountable to yourself. You stop measuring success by outcomes alone. You begin measuring success by the quality of your choices. This changes everything. Because outcomes are uncertain, character remains available. You may act wisely and still fail. You may act courageously and still lose. You may act justly and still face criticism. Yet, none of these outcomes diminish the value of virtue. The value was always in the action itself. The disciplined person understands this. They stop asking whether the world rewarded them. They ask whether they acted well. This question brings stability. External rewards fluctuate. Virtue remains. Public opinion changes. Virtue remains. Circumstances shift. Virtue remains. And when a person finally understands this truth, they stop living as a victim of events. They stop waiting for permission to become disciplined. They stop expecting the world to arrange itself according to their preferences. They accept reality and begin governing themselves within it. That is strength. That is freedom. That is peace. So before this day ends, ask yourself one final question. What have I been trying to control that was never mine? Do not answer casually. Answer honestly. Perhaps it is another person's approval. Perhaps it is a past mistake. Perhaps it is an uncertain future. Perhaps it is an outcome that has never depended entirely upon you. Whatever it is, release your claim over it. Return your attention to what belongs to you. Return to your judgments. Return to your choices. Return to your actions. Return to your character. This is your ground. This is your responsibility. This is your power. Life is shorter than you think. The days you spend fighting reality will never return. The energy you spend chasing control over the uncontrollable is energy taken from the work that matters. Do not waste another day demanding authority over the world. Govern yourself. Examine yourself. Discipline yourself. Direct yourself. The person who masters this distinction has already taken the first step toward freedom. And freedom begins the moment you recognize what lies within your control today. Number 2. Reject the need for approval from others. You have been trained, without noticing it, to treat the opinions of other people as if they were measurements of your worth. This training did not come from reason. It came from repetition, from habit, from silent imitation of a world that constantly rewards appearance over character. You learned to adjust your behavior not according to what is right, but according to what is seen. You learned to measure yourself through external eyes rather than internal judgment, and slowly, without resistance, you began to live as if you were owned by the reactions of others. Now observe what this has done to your life. You hesitate before speaking not because you lack truth, but because you fear misunderstanding. You alter your behavior not because your judgment has changed, but because you anticipate evaluation. You revisit your decisions not to improve them, but to imagine how they appear in the minds of those who may never think of you again. In this condition, your attention is no longer directed inward toward the discipline of your own mind. It is scattered outward, constantly scanning for approval, correction, or rejection. A mind in this state cannot remain steady because it has placed its center of gravity outside itself. Begin with a clear distinction that must never be blurred. The opinion of others is not within your control. Their understanding is not within your control. Their perception is not within your control. Their praise is not within your control. Their rejection is not within your control. If you attach your well-being to any of these, You are binding your stability to forces that shift without reason and change without warning. You are building your peace on unstable ground and then wondering why it collapses under pressure. The only domain that belongs fully to you is the domain of judgment and action. Within that domain lies your ability to choose what is right, to speak with honesty, to act with restraint, and to correct yourself when you are wrong. These are the only elements that define your character. Everything else is secondary, yet most people reverse this order completely. They prioritize how they are seen while neglecting how they are. They refine their image while leaving their judgment unexamined. They polish their reputation while allowing their inner discipline to decay. This reversal is the root of dependence on approval. When you care more about being seen as good than about being good, you become vulnerable to every observer. You begin performing your life instead of living it. You begin tailoring your actions to imagined audiences. You begin filtering your words through the lens of acceptance. In time, even your thoughts become shaped by what you believe others might approve of. At that point, you are no longer guiding your life. You are reacting to it. Stop for a moment and observe how often you adjust your behavior in real time based on perceived judgment. A conversation changes tone when you sense disagreement. A choice is softened when you imagine criticism. A decision is delayed when you anticipate disapproval. These adjustments are not guided by reason, they are guided by fear. And fear of judgment is simply another form of slavery to what lies outside your control. The disciplined mind recognizes this early and refuses to participate in it, not through arrogance, not through defiance, but through clarity. The clarity that external approval is not a reliable measure of truth. The clarity that people can approve of what is false and disapprove of what is true. The clarity that crowds can be moved by impulse, bias, misunderstanding, and emotion. If your stability depends on such shifting ground, you will never stand firm for long. You must learn to separate two questions that are often confused. The first question is whether your action is just, reasonable, and aligned with your responsibility. The second question is whether others approve of it. These two questions are not connected. A just action may be misunderstood, a reasonable decision may be criticized, a disciplined choice may be rejected. None of this changes its value. Yet when you confuse approval with correctness, you abandon reason in favor of popularity, and popularity is never stable enough to guide a life. When you feel the impulse to seek approval, pause and examine what is actually happening in your mind. You are not seeking truth. You are seeking relief from discomfort. You are attempting to avoid the feeling of being judged. You are attempting to secure emotional safety through external validation. But this relief is temporary because approval is never guaranteed and never permanent. Even when it is given, it must be constantly renewed, which means your dependence only deepens. Instead of feeding this impulse, train yourself to ask a different question in the moment of uncertainty. Is what I am about to do guided by reason or by desire for approval? If it is guided by reason, proceed without hesitation. If it is guided by approval seeking, stop and correct your intention. This simple interruption restores control to where it belongs, not in the hands of the observer, but in the mind of the one acting. You will notice that when you begin to practice this separation, discomfort arises, the mind resists. It has grown accustomed to external validation as a form of emotional support. It will whisper that rejection is dangerous, that disagreement is failure, that criticism is threat. Do not obey these impressions immediately. Examine them. Most of them are not truths. They are learned reactions that have never been questioned. The unexamined mind confuses discomfort with danger. The disciplined mind recognizes them as distinct. There is a deeper consequence to living for approval that few people acknowledge. when your actions are shaped by how others might respond, you gradually lose access to your own judgment. You stop trusting your capacity to decide what is right. You outsource your reasoning to the imagined reactions of others. Over time, you become uncertain even when you are correct, because your confidence is no longer rooted in understanding, but in external reinforcement. A mind in this state cannot lead itself, it can only follow. To reverse this condition, you must rebuild trust in your own rational faculty. This begins with small acts of independence from approval. Speak truthfully even when it is not convenient. Make decisions based on reason even when they are not popular. Allow yourself to be misunderstood when misunderstanding is the cost of integrity. Each time you do this, you restore a fragment of your inner authority. Each time you surrender to approval seeking, you weaken it. At the beginning of the day, prepare your mind with intention. Do not ask how you will be seen, ask how you will act. Do not ask who will approve, ask what is correct. Do not ask what will gain acceptance, ask what aligns with your responsibility. This shift in questioning is subtle, but it determines the entire structure of your day. A life directed by approval is reactive and unstable. A life directed by reason is steady and self-governed. Throughout the day you will encounter moments that test this discipline. A colleague may dismiss your idea, a stranger may misunderstand your actions, a group may not respond as you hoped. In each of these moments, you have a choice. You can allow external judgment to rewrite your internal state, or you can recognize it as something outside your control and return to your own standard. The external reaction is information, not authority. It describes perception, not truth. The more you practice this separation, the more you will notice a quiet shift within yourself. Actions begin to feel lighter because they are no longer burdened by the need to be received a certain way. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer filtered through imagined audiences. Conversations become more honest because they are no longer shaped by performance. You begin to live from intention rather than reaction. This is not indifference to others, it is independence from their control over your mind. At the end of the day, examine where approval influenced your actions. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe honestly. Where did you speak to be liked rather than to be truthful? Where did you remain silent out of fear of disapproval? Where did you adjust your behavior to avoid judgment? These observations are not for punishment. They are for training awareness. Without awareness, correction is impossible. Then remind yourself of what remains unshaken, regardless of external opinion. Your ability to choose your response remains intact. Your ability to correct your judgment remains intact. Your ability to act with integrity remains intact. These are not granted by others and cannot be taken by them. They belong entirely to your rational nature. The world will continue to judge. That is its nature. People will continue to misunderstand. That is their limitation. Opinions will continue to shift. That is their instability. If you anchor yourself to any of these, you will shift with them. If you anchor yourself to reason and virtue, you will remain steady regardless of them. There is a final clarity that must be accepted without hesitation. You are not here to be universally approved. You are here to act rightly within the limits of your role as a rational being. Approval is optional. Integrity is not. Acceptance from others is uncertain. Judgment from yourself is essential. When you confuse these, you suffer unnecessarily. When you separate them, you become free from one of the most persistent sources of inner disturbance. Return now to this understanding whenever you feel the pull of external validation. Do not negotiate with it. Recognize it, examine it, and release it. Bring your attention back to what belongs to you, your thoughts, your choices, your actions, your character. This is where your responsibility lives. This is where your power resides. This is where your life is truly governed. And when you begin to live from this center, you will notice something that cannot be taught through explanation alone. The need for approval does not disappear because the world changes. It disappears because you stop granting it authority over your mind. You reclaim your judgment. You reclaim your direction. You reclaim your life. Number 3. Examine your judgments before blaming anyone else. Most of your suffering is not caused by what happens to you, but by what you conclude about what happens to you. You receive an event, and immediately you attach meaning to it without examination. A tone in someone's voice becomes disrespect. A delay becomes neglect. A mistake becomes proof that someone is against you. A silence becomes rejection. You do not see reality first. You see your interpretation first, and you treat that interpretation as truth without asking whether it deserves to be believed. This is where your disturbance begins, not in the event itself, but in the untested judgment that follows it. You move too quickly from impression to conclusion, and in that speed you lose clarity. The mind that does not pause to examine its own reasoning becomes a machine that produces accusations faster than understanding can correct them. And once blame is formed, reason is pushed aside, because blame does not seek truth. It seeks relief. Notice how often your attention turns outward the moment discomfort appears. Something goes wrong, and instead of examining your own role in interpretation, you search for an external cause. You point to another person's behavior. You point to circumstances. You point to timing. You point to luck. You construct a narrative in which you are affected but not involved. This gives temporary comfort, but it removes responsibility from where it actually belongs. You do not control how events unfold. You do not control how other people behave. You do not control the circumstances you enter, but you do control how you judge these things, and that judgment is where your life is actually formed. If your judgment is careless, your life becomes reactive. If your judgment is disciplined, your life becomes stable, even in disorder. The untrained mind treats judgment as automatic. It believes what it feels first. It accepts emotional reaction as evidence. It assumes that intensity equals truth. But intensity is not truth. It is simply pressure within the mind. A strong feeling does not prove accuracy. It only proves that something has been stirred. Without examination, that stirred reaction becomes accusation, and accusation becomes conflict, even when no real harm exists outside the mind. Before you blame anyone today, you must interrupt this chain, not after the conclusion is formed, but before it is accepted. When something happens that disturbs you, do not immediately assign cause. Do not immediately assign fault. Pause at the level where judgment begins to form. Ask yourself whether you are seeing the event clearly or whether you are reacting through emotion that has not been examined. This pause is the beginning of inner discipline. Without it, you are not thinking. You are repeating conditioned responses. With it, you regain control over the only part of experience that belongs to you. Most people believe blame is a form of understanding. It is not. Blame is a shortcut that avoids deeper inquiry. It replaces examination with certainty. It replaces clarity with conclusion. It allows the mind to stop working before it has truly begun. Once blame is assigned, the mind feels satisfied, but that satisfaction is not wisdom. It is closure without truth. When you blame someone, you are declaring that your interpretation of the situation is complete. But have you examined all contributing factors? Have you considered your own perception? Have you questioned whether you saw the situation accurately? Have you checked whether your reaction was shaped by expectation rather than reality? Most people skip these questions entirely, yet they still reach firm conclusions about others. This is why relationships become tense unnecessarily. Two people act, misunderstandings occur, and instead of examining their own interpretation, Each person constructs blame. Each believes they are responding to truth, when in reality they are responding to a mental model shaped by limited perception. Two incomplete interpretations collide and produce conflict that neither side fully understands. The disciplined mind refuses this pattern. It does not rush to assign fault. It first examines the quality of its own perception. It asks whether the interpretation is complete or partial. It asks whether emotion has distorted what was seen. It asks whether expectation has colored what was received. Only after this examination does it consider responsibility, and even then it proceeds with caution rather than certainty. To practice this, begin with a simple discipline throughout your day. Whenever you feel the impulse to blame, stop. Do not continue the thought. Do not build the argument. Do not reinforce the narrative. Pause at the moment of emergence and ask a single question. What part of this is my judgment and not the event itself? You will begin to notice something important. The event is often simple. The interpretation is what becomes complex. Someone speaks briefly. That is the event. Your mind adds meaning. It becomes disrespect, dismissal, or hostility. The suffering does not come from the brief speech. It comes from the meaning you attach to it without verification. This attachment to unexamined meaning is what creates unnecessary emotional weight. You carry interpretations as if they were facts. You defend them as if they were reality. You react to them as if they were unquestionable. Yet they are only judgments formed in a moment, and moments are often incomplete. Train yourself to slow down this formation of judgment. When something happens, separate the raw event from your interpretation of it. The event is neutral until you assign meaning. That meaning must be examined before it is accepted. If it cannot withstand examination, it should not govern your response. This practice will initially feel uncomfortable because it removes the immediate satisfaction of blame. The mind prefers blame because it feels decisive. It creates the illusion of clarity. But clarity that has not been examined is not clarity at all. It is assumption dressed as certainty. As you continue this discipline, you will begin to see how often your emotional reactions depend on interpretations you never questioned. A delayed response was not necessarily disregard. A disagreement was not necessarily disrespect. A mistake was not necessarily carelessness. Yet without examination, you treated all of these as confirmed judgments and reacted accordingly. Now consider what this has done to your inner life. How many moments of frustration were created by conclusions that were never tested? How many relationships were strained by interpretations that were never verified? How much peace was lost because judgment was allowed to operate without oversight? The purpose of examination is not to eliminate responsibility. It is to place responsibility where it belongs. Sometimes others are wrong. Sometimes situations are unfair. Sometimes actions are careless. But even then, your response must come from clear judgment, not automatic accusation. Otherwise, you are reacting twice, once to the event and once to your own unexamined interpretation of it. A disciplined mind holds itself accountable before it holds others accountable. It first asks whether it understood correctly. It first asks whether it responded appropriately. It first asks whether it allowed emotion to distort perception. This order is essential. Without it, you become reactive rather than rational. In the morning, prepare your mind for this discipline. Before engaging with the world, remind yourself that every event you encounter will pass through your judgment before it becomes experience. This means your life is not shaped directly by events, but by how you interpret them. If your interpretation is careless, your life will feel chaotic even in ordinary circumstances. Set an intention to examine before concluding, not once, but repeatedly. Not as theory, but as practice. When you meet people, observe your immediate judgments and delay acceptance of them. When you encounter difficulty, withhold blame until your own perception has been inspected. When frustration arises, trace it back to the interpretation that created it rather than the event that triggered it. As the day progresses, you will notice the space between event and judgment expanding. In that space lies your ability to choose clarity over reaction. This is where real freedom begins, not freedom from events, but freedom from unexamined conclusions. At night, review your day with honesty. Identify moments where you assigned blame without examination. Do not excuse them. Do not exaggerate them. Simply observe them. See where your judgment rushed ahead of understanding. See where emotion replaced inquiry. See where interpretation was accepted without question. This reflection is not for guilt. It is for training awareness. Awareness is what allows correction. Without it, the same patterns repeat endlessly under different circumstances. With it, the mind gradually becomes more precise, more stable, and less reactive. Over time, you will begin to notice a shift in how you relate to others. Accusation will decrease, not because you suppress it, but because you no longer trust unexamined judgment. You will still recognize wrongdoing, but you will approach it with clarity rather than immediate blame. You will distinguish between fact and interpretation with increasing accuracy. This distinction will reduce unnecessary conflict and increase internal steadiness. Most importantly, you will begin to experience less internal disturbance because much of your previous suffering was not caused by events themselves, but by conclusions formed too quickly and held too firmly. When those conclusions are examined before acceptance, they lose their power to disturb. You will still face difficulty. You will still encounter misunderstanding. You will still experience error, both in yourself and in others. But you will no longer compound these realities with untested judgment. You will meet them with reason rather than reaction, with examination rather than blame. And in that shift, you will reclaim something essential. Not control over events, but control over your interpretation of events. Not control over others, but control over your own judgment. Not control over outcomes, but control over your response to them. This is where clarity begins. This is where unnecessary suffering ends. This is where the disciplined mind takes its first real step toward inner stability. Number 4. Govern your mind with reason each day. Your mind is not naturally disciplined. It is naturally active, reactive, and easily pulled by whatever impression arrives first. Left untrained, it becomes a crowded place where every thought speaks at once, and none of them are questioned. In such a state, you do not govern your mind. Your mind governs you through impulse, memory, emotion, and assumption. You call it thinking, but much of it is only reaction repeating itself in different forms. To govern your mind with reason each day is to reverse this condition. It is to place a rational authority above the noise of automatic responses. It is to establish a clear inner standard that does not change with mood, situation, or external pressure. Without this authority, you become a passenger in your own mental life, carried wherever impressions happen to lead you. Observe how often your thoughts begin without your consent. A situation appears and immediately a conclusion forms. A person speaks and instantly a judgment arises. A memory returns and without invitation it shapes your mood. You do not select these movements. They occur before awareness has time to intervene. If you do not intervene afterward with reason, you will accept them as truth simply because they appeared first. This is where most suffering begins. Not in the world outside you, but in the ungoverned movement of interpretation within you. A mind that does not examine its own conclusions becomes convinced by its own speed. It confuses immediacy with accuracy. It confuses repetition with truth. It confuses emotional intensity with reality. Reason is the faculty that interrupts this confusion. It does not eliminate impressions. It examines them. It does not suppress thought. It evaluates thought. It does not react instantly. It questions before accepting. When reason is absent, impressions rule. When reason is present, impressions are tested before becoming judgments. To govern your mind each day means to install this examination as a constant practice rather than an occasional reflection. You do not wait for major events to exercise reason. You apply it to small moments, ordinary interactions, and subtle reactions. The mind is trained not in moments of crisis, but in moments of repetition. Begin your day by establishing this authority before anything else enters your attention. Before external demands begin to shape your thinking, remind yourself that every impression you will encounter must pass through rational evaluation. You will see many things today that are incomplete. You will hear statements that are partial. You will feel impulses that are unexamined. None of these are automatically trustworthy. Reason is the filter through which they must pass. Without this preparation, your mind begins the day already exposed. Notifications, conversations, expectations, and concerns enter without resistance. Each one leaves an impression. Each impression carries emotional weight. Without governance, these impressions accumulate into mental disorder. You begin reacting to fragments of information as if they were complete truths. Reason restores structure. It asks simple but essential questions. What exactly is being presented? What part of this is fact and what part is interpretation? What belongs to the event and what belongs to my reaction? What is within my control and what is not? These questions slow the mind just enough for clarity to appear. Most people avoid this slowing because they equate speed with effectiveness. They want immediate responses, immediate judgments, immediate decisions, but a mind that responds immediately cannot verify whether it is responding correctly. It only knows how to respond quickly. Speed without examination produces consistency of reaction, not consistency of truth. You must learn to tolerate the space between impression and response. That space is where governance happens. In that space, reason steps forward. Without that space, impulse decides everything. The difference between a reactive life and a governed life is measured in that small but decisive interval. Throughout the day, you will encounter moments that test this discipline repeatedly. A frustration appears in your work. A misunderstanding arises in conversation. A delay interrupts your plan. A person behaves differently than expected. Each of these moments carries an immediate invitation to react. The undisciplined mind accepts that invitation without question. The governed mind pauses and applies reason before responding. In that pause, you recognize something essential. The event itself is not demanding emotional reaction. Your interpretation of the event is, a delay is simply a delay, a disagreement is simply differing perspectives, a mistake is simply an error in execution. None of these inherently require disturbance. It is your judgment that adds disturbance when it is unexamined. Governance of mind requires continuous separation between what is presented and what is assumed. The presented is neutral until interpreted. The assumed is where distortion begins. If you do not govern assumption with reason, assumption becomes your reality. You begin living inside interpretations that have never been verified. To correct this, you must practice returning to the raw form of each experience before judgment is applied. Strip away added meaning, reduce the situation to what is actually observable, then apply reason to determine what response is appropriate. This prevents emotional escalation built on incomplete understanding. You will notice that many of your mental disturbances dissolve when examined closely. What initially felt like insult may reveal itself as misunderstanding. What felt like rejection may reveal itself as difference in priorities. What felt like failure may reveal itself as incomplete execution rather than final judgment. Reason does not soften truth, it clarifies it. When reason governs, complaints begin to lose their authority. Complaint is a form of mental habit that seeks validation through repetition of dissatisfaction. It reinforces the belief that external conditions are responsible for internal disturbance. But when reason is active, you see that external conditions are only triggers. The disturbance arises from interpretation. This recognition removes unnecessary blame from your environment and returns responsibility to your mind. Not responsibility for what happens, but responsibility for how it is interpreted and responded to. This is the only domain where your governance is absolute. As you continue this practice, you will notice resistance within yourself. The mind prefers familiar reactions. It resists examination because examination exposes inconsistency. It resists reason because reason interrupts habitual comfort. It resists discipline because discipline demands effort before reward. This resistance is expected. It is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that governance is being established where none existed before. Do not negotiate with this resistance. Observe it, acknowledge it, then return to reason without delay. Each time you do this, you strengthen the governing faculty. Each time you surrender to impulse, you weaken it. The direction of your life is shaped by these repeated decisions. At midday, when attention is scattered and demands are high, pause briefly to reset your mind. Ask whether your current thinking is guided by reason or by reaction. If it is reaction, correct it immediately. Do not allow prolonged, ungoverned thinking to accumulate. Small corrections throughout the day maintain mental order more effectively than rare moments of reflection. In interactions with others, apply reason before interpretation. Do not assume intention without examination. Do not assign meaning without verification. Do not accept emotional interpretation as factual understanding. People act from many causes that are not immediately visible. Reason prevents you from reducing complexity into premature conclusions. In moments of difficulty, reason becomes especially important. Disturbance tends to amplify perception, making situations appear larger and more urgent than they are. Reason reduces this distortion by returning attention to what is actually present. It distinguishes between immediate reality and projected fear. It prevents escalation driven by imagination rather than fact. At the end of the day, review your mental governance honestly. Identify moments where reaction preceded reason. Identify moments where judgment was accepted without examination. Identify moments where complaint replaced analysis. This reflection is not for self-criticism but for calibration. Without calibration, the same patterns repeat unconsciously. Then identify moments where reason succeeded, moments where you paused before reacting, moments where you questioned interpretation, moments where you separated fact from assumption. These are signs that governance is taking hold. They should be recognized clearly so that progress is visible and reinforced. Over time, as this practice becomes consistent, you will notice a change in the quality of your inner life. Mental noise begins to decrease, not because thoughts disappear, but because they are no longer automatically accepted. Emotional volatility begins to reduce because reactions are no longer immediate. Confusion begins to lessen because interpretation is no longer unchecked. You begin to experience your mind not as a chaotic sequence of impulses, but as a space that can be directed. Not perfectly, not permanently without effort, but reliably when reason is consistently applied. This is governance, not elimination of disturbance, but authority over response. The world outside you will remain unpredictable. Events will continue without concern for your preferences. People will continue to act from their own judgments. Circumstances will continue to shift without warning. None of this is under your control. But your response to all of it remains within your capacity for reasoned governance. This is the foundation of inner stability. Not control over life, but control over interpretation. Not control over others, but control over judgment, not control over outcomes, but control over response. When reason governs consistently, external instability no longer becomes internal disorder, and in that state, you no longer live as a reaction to the world. You live as a mind that examines, evaluates, and chooses with clarity before acting. This is the daily discipline that transforms mental chaos into structured awareness. This is how the mind is governed, not once, but each day, through continuous return to reason as the only reliable guide. Number 5. Withdraw attention from opinions that weaken character. Your attention is not neutral. It is a force that shapes the direction of your mind and the quality of your character. Wherever you place it, your inner life begins to follow. When you give attention to what is stable, your mind becomes stable. When you give attention to what is unstable, your mind becomes unstable. Most people never realize this and allow their attention to be pulled by every passing opinion as if it has equal value. Opinions are everywhere. They arrive without invitation, they multiply without effort, and they spread without verification. Some are careless, some are confused, some are driven by emotion rather than understanding. Yet the untrained mind receives them all as if they deserve equal consideration. In doing so, it becomes shaped by voices that have no commitment to truth or virtue. Over time, these voices begin to influence not only what you think, but how you behave and what you believe about yourself. You must understand this clearly. Not every opinion deserves space in your mind. Some opinions are not guidance, they are distractions from clarity. Some opinions do not strengthen your judgment, they weaken it. Some opinions do not refine your character, they erode it. And if you allow every external voice to remain in your awareness, you will slowly lose your ability to distinguish what is valuable from what is empty. Your character is formed by what you repeatedly attend to. If you repeatedly attend to criticism that is shallow, you begin to doubt your own judgment unnecessarily. If you repeatedly attend to praise that is careless, you begin to depend on external validation. If you repeatedly attend to negativity, you begin to interpret life through suspicion. Attention is not passive. It trains your mind in the direction it follows. To withdraw attention from opinions that weaken character is not avoidance of truth. It is protection of clarity. Truth does not require constant exposure to noise. It requires discernment. You are not obligated to engage with every judgment directed at you. You are obligated to ensure that what enters your mind contributes to your ability to live rationally and virtuously. Most people believe they must respond to every opinion, defend themselves against every misunderstanding, or correct every false impression. This belief drains mental strength. It gives authority to voices that were never meant to govern your self-understanding. The result is a life spent reacting rather than directing. You become reactive to interpretations that do not deserve governance over your attention. Observe how often your peace is disturbed, not by events themselves, but by opinions about events. Someone misunderstands your action, and instead of remaining grounded in your intention, you begin to question yourself unnecessarily. Someone criticizes your decision, and instead of evaluating it through reason, you begin to second-guess your judgment. Someone expresses doubt, and instead of relying on your own understanding, you begin to weaken your resolve. In each case, attention has been granted to an external judgment that does not contribute to your development. A disciplined mind does not treat every opinion as equal input. It filters, it examines the source, it evaluates the relevance, it considers whether the opinion contributes to virtue or undermines it. If it undermines clarity, it is not engaged. If it strengthens reason, it is considered. If it has no constructive value, it is released from attention. This is not arrogance, it is mental order. Arrogance assumes superiority without examination. Discernment recognizes difference without emotional attachment. You are not rejecting others. You are refining your attention so that it serves your development rather than dispersing it. When you allow weak opinions to remain in your awareness, they do not remain neutral. They begin to shape interpretation. A single careless remark can distort your perception if you continue to revisit it. A repeated negative comment can alter your confidence if you continue to feed it attention. The mind absorbs what it repeatedly entertains, regardless of its value. This is why withdrawal of attention is a discipline. It is not a reaction, it is a choice. You choose what deserves mental space and what does not. You choose what influences your judgment and what is recognized but not absorbed. Without this discipline, your mental environment becomes governed by external noise rather than internal reason. Begin your day by establishing a boundary within your mind, not a boundary against people, but a boundary against unfiltered influence. Decide that not every opinion will be granted equal weight. Decide that your attention will be reserved for what strengthens your ability to act with clarity and virtue. This intention sets the tone for how you engage with the world. Throughout the day, notice how opinions arrive. Some will come through conversation, some through observation, some through memory, some through imagined reactions of others. Each one will attempt to gain entry into your thinking. At this moment, you must pause before granting it influence. Ask whether this opinion contributes to your rational understanding or whether it only introduces disturbance without direction. If it weakens your character by increasing doubt without evidence, withdraw from it mentally. Do not engage further. Do not continue internal dialogue with it. Do not allow it to expand through repetition. Attention is what gives it life. Without attention, it loses influence. This practice will reveal something important. Much of what disturbs you has no real authority over your life. It persists only because you continue to revisit it mentally. Opinions that are not revisited lose their power. Opinions that are not reinforced fade naturally. The mind does not need to fight them. It only needs to stop feeding them. You will also notice that when attention is withdrawn from weak opinions, space is created for stronger reasoning. Instead of being filled with reactions to external voices, your mind becomes available for clearer judgment. You begin to think with more stability because your attention is no longer fragmented by unnecessary influence. In relationships, this discipline becomes especially important. People will express judgments about you that reflect their perspective, not necessarily reality. If you attach yourself to every interpretation, you will constantly shift your understanding of yourself based on external fluctuation. This creates instability in identity. A disciplined mind listens without absorption. It receives information without surrendering authority. At work, similar patterns appear. Opinions about performance, capability, and decisions will circulate. Some will be useful. Many will be superficial. If you treat them all equally, your confidence will fluctuate unnecessarily. If you filter them through reason, only what is relevant to improvement will remain. The rest will be released without emotional attachment. At night, review the opinions that entered your mind throughout the day. Identify which ones influenced your thinking without examination. Identify which ones created unnecessary doubt or disturbance. Identify which ones were entertained beyond their usefulness. This reflection is not for regret. It is for awareness of where attention was misplaced. Then recognize where discipline was maintained. Moments where opinions were acknowledged but not absorbed. Moments where judgment remained grounded despite external noise. Moments where reason prevailed over reaction. These are signs that your ability to govern attention is strengthening. Over time, this practice changes the structure of your inner life. External opinions lose their power to unsettle you, not because they disappear, but because they no longer govern your attention. You begin to distinguish clearly between what is relevant and what is irrelevant to your development. Your mind becomes less reactive and more deliberate. You will still hear opinions, that is unavoidable, but you will no longer be ruled by them. You will no longer allow them to define your worth, direct your choices, or destabilize your judgment. Instead, you will see them for what they are, passing expressions that may or may not contain value, but never contain authority over your character. In this way, attention becomes aligned with reason rather than scattered across external noise. And when attention is aligned with reason, character begins to stabilize. You stop reacting to every voice. You stop absorbing every judgment. You stop carrying mental weight that does not belong to you. What remains is clarity, not isolation from the world, but independence within it. You engage with reality without being shaped by every opinion within it. You listen without surrender. You observe without absorption. You respond from reason rather than reaction. This is the discipline of withdrawal, not withdrawal from life, but withdrawal from unnecessary influence, not rejection of others, but refinement of attention, not avoidance of truth, but protection of clarity. And when this discipline becomes consistent, you will notice something subtle but profound. Your mind becomes quieter, not because the world changes, but because you stop allowing every opinion to occupy space it does not deserve. In that quiet, reason becomes easier to hear. And in that clarity, character becomes easier to live. Number 6. Strengthen virtue through disciplined daily self-reflection. Most people move through their days without ever truly seeing themselves. They observe events, they react to people, they judge circumstances, but they rarely turn their attention inward with honesty. The mind becomes skilled at evaluating everything except its own operation. It becomes quick to criticize the world, but slow to examine its own reasoning. This imbalance is where inner instability begins. A life without self-reflection is a life driven by unexamined impulses. You repeat patterns without noticing them. You react in familiar ways without questioning whether those reactions are justified. You form judgments without testing their accuracy. You carry emotional responses from one moment into the next, without clearing them through reason. Over time, this creates a layered accumulation of mental noise that feels like confusion, but is actually unexamined habit. To strengthen virtue through disciplined daily self-reflection is to reverse this neglect. It is to bring the mind back into contact with itself, with complete honesty. Not with praise, not with condemnation, with clear observation of what was done, why it was done, and whether it aligned with rational conduct. Without this practice, virtue remains theoretical. With it, virtue becomes lived structure. You must understand that your actions during the day are not isolated events. They are expressions of your inner judgments. Every reaction you have is preceded by an interpretation. Every decision is shaped by an assumption. Every emotional response is built on a conclusion you accepted, often without examination. If these internal movements are not reviewed, they continue unchecked, shaping your character in ways you do not notice. Self-reflection is not indulgence. It is not emotional replay. It is not dwelling on mistakes. It is disciplined examination of mental and behavioral patterns. It asks a simple question: did I act according to reason or according to impulse? This question must be asked without distortion, without justification, and without avoidance. When you fail to reflect, you carry unresolved reactions into the next day. A frustration from the morning remains active in the background of your thinking. A misjudgment from the afternoon influences your mood in the evening. A careless reaction from yesterday becomes part of your default behavior today. Without reflection, nothing is corrected, everything is repeated. Begin your day by preparing for this examination in advance. Before you encounter external demands, remind yourself that your actions will be reviewed, not by others in a judgmental sense, but by your own rational awareness. This awareness alone begins to regulate behavior, because what is observed clearly is less likely to be repeated unconsciously. During the day, act with the awareness that each choice contributes to the material you will later examine. This shifts your behavior subtly. You begin to notice more carefully what you say, how you respond, and why you react. Not from fear of judgment, but from respect for clarity. The mind that knows it will be observed becomes more deliberate in its operation. Self-reflection requires separation between event and interpretation. When reviewing your day, do not simply replay what happened. Examine how you interpreted what happened. A situation is neutral until you assign meaning to it. The quality of your reflection depends on your ability to distinguish between what occurred externally and what was constructed internally. Many disturbances that felt significant in the moment lose their force when examined later with reason. What seemed like offense may reveal itself as misunderstanding. What felt like failure may reveal itself as incomplete effort rather than final outcome. What appeared as injustice may reveal itself as limited perception. Self-reflection corrects distortions that emotion creates in real time. This practice also reveals patterns that are otherwise invisible. You may notice that you consistently react defensively in certain situations. You may notice that you frequently interpret neutral actions as negative. You may notice that you often abandon reason when under pressure. These patterns are not visible during reaction. They only become visible when you examine yourself after the fact with clarity. Without this examination, patterns become identity without awareness. You become what you repeatedly do without understanding why you do it. Self-reflection interrupts this unconscious formation of character and replaces it with conscious observation. You begin to see not only what you are doing, but how and why you are doing it. At the end of the day, withdraw from external engagement and turn attention inward. Review your interactions, your judgments, your decisions, and your emotional responses. Do not search for justification, search for accuracy. Ask whether each action was guided by reason or by impulse. Ask whether your judgments were tested or accepted immediately. Ask whether your reactions were necessary or automatic. When you identify moments of error, do not extend them into self-condemnation. That is another form of emotional distortion. The purpose is not to punish the mind, but to train it. Recognition without correction is incomplete. Correction without understanding is unstable. Both must be present. Honest recognition followed by rational adjustment. When you identify moments of discipline, observe them carefully as well. Where did you pause before reacting? Where did you question your initial judgment? Where did you act in accordance with reason despite pressure to do otherwise? These moments are evidence that governance over your mind is possible and already beginning to develop. They must be noted so that they can be strengthened through repetition. Over time, this daily reflection creates a shift in awareness. You begin to notice your judgments forming earlier in the day because you have trained yourself to recognize them later. You begin to interrupt reactions more frequently because you have seen their consequences clearly. You begin to choose responses more deliberately because you have observed the cost of impulsive behavior. Self-reflection also reduces internal fragmentation. Without examination, the mind carries unresolved contradictions. You say one thing and do another without noticing the inconsistency. You believe one principle but act against it in practice. These contradictions accumulate silently and weaken inner coherence. Reflection exposes them so they can be resolved through conscious adjustment. A disciplined mind does not avoid seeing its own flaws. It studies them with clarity so they can be corrected. This is not self-rejection, it is self-governance. Just as a craftsman inspects his work to refine it, the rational mind inspects its own conduct to improve it. Without inspection, refinement is impossible. As this practice deepens, you will notice a reduction in unnecessary emotional turbulence. Many reactions lose their intensity when they are later examined and understood. Anger diminishes when its interpretation is revealed. Anxiety weakens when its assumptions are exposed. Regret softens when its context is clarified. Reflection dissolves distortion through understanding. At the same time, your sense of responsibility becomes clearer. You begin to recognize where your judgments contributed to outcomes you previously attributed entirely to external causes. This recognition is not meant to create guilt, but awareness of influence. You cannot control everything that happens, but you are never without control over your judgment and response. In the morning, carry this awareness forward. Do not assume that yesterday's insight guarantees today's discipline. The mind resets its tendencies unless actively trained. Each day presents new opportunities for reaction, new impressions to interpret, and new judgments to form. Without continuous reflection, old patterns return unnoticed. Therefore, maintain consistency in this practice, not occasionally, not when convenient, daily. The repetition is what builds strength. Just as physical exercise strengthens the body through consistent resistance, self-reflection strengthens the mind through consistent examination. Without repetition, there is no development. Only repetition transforms awareness into character. Eventually, you will begin to experience a subtle but profound change. You will become less surprised by your own behavior because you will understand its origin. You will become less controlled by external events because you will recognize your internal responses earlier. You will become less reactive because you will see the formation of reaction before it fully develops. This is the purpose of disciplined self-reflection. Not perfection, not elimination of error, but continuous alignment between action and reason. A mind that regularly examines itself becomes more stable, not because life becomes easier, but because confusion is reduced at its source. And when confusion is reduced, virtue becomes easier to maintain, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived pattern of behavior guided by constant awareness. You begin to act with greater intention. You begin to respond with greater clarity. You begin to live with greater internal order. This is how the mind is strengthened, not through avoidance of mistakes, but through honest recognition of them, not through external approval, but through internal examination, not through occasional insight, but through disciplined daily reflection that returns the mind again and again to reason as its guiding authority. Number 7. Accept criticism calmly, without surrendering your values. Criticism enters your life in many forms, yet your mind reacts to it in only a few predictable ways. It tightens, defends, resists, or collapses into self-doubt. None of these reactions are the result of the criticism itself. They are the result of your interpretation of it. You do not experience criticism directly. You experience your judgment about criticism, and that judgment determines whether you grow from it or suffer because of it. Most people never separate the message from the emotional reaction it triggers. They hear criticism and immediately assume harm has been done. They treat discomfort as proof of wrongdoing. They treat disagreement as attack. They treat correction as humiliation. In doing so, they surrender clarity to emotion before reason has any opportunity to examine what was actually said. The disciplined mind does not begin with reaction. It begins with evaluation. It asks what is being communicated, what is accurate, what is distorted, and what is irrelevant. Only after this examination does it decide what to accept and what to discard. Without this step, Criticism becomes noise that shapes identity instead of information that refines judgment. You must recognize that not all criticism is equal. Some of it is informed and precise. Some of it is careless and emotional. Some of it reflects truth. Some of it reflects misunderstanding. Some of it reveals more about the speaker than about you. If you fail to distinguish between these forms, you will either absorb everything uncritically or reject everything defensively. Both extremes weaken your ability to learn. Accepting criticism calmly does not mean absorbing it blindly. It means maintaining inner stability while evaluating its content. Calmness is not agreement. It is the absence of emotional distortion during examination. When calmness is present, reason can function clearly. When calmness is absent, reaction replaces understanding. The first discipline is to pause when criticism is received. Do not respond immediately. Do not justify yourself immediately. Do not reject immediately. The initial impression is not yet knowledge. It is only an input that requires inspection. If you react instantly, you are responding to emotion rather than truth. In that pause, separate what belongs to you from what does not. The words of another person belong to them. Your interpretation of those words belongs to you. The accuracy of their statement may or may not belong to reality. Your response belongs entirely to your character. This separation is essential for clarity. Without it, everything becomes entangled and difficult to understand. Once separation is clear, examine the content of the criticism without emotional involvement. Ask whether there is truth within it. Ask whether it identifies something you can improve. Ask whether it is based on fact or assumption. Ask whether it reflects your behavior or the perception of someone else. This inquiry transforms criticism from a threat into an opportunity for refinement. If the criticism contains truth, accept it without resistance, not because it is pleasant, but because it is useful. Truth remains true regardless of its source. If a point is valid, rejecting it does not protect you. It only preserves error. Growth requires the willingness to recognize truth even when it is uncomfortable. If the criticism is inaccurate, release it without emotional attachment. Do not carry it forward in your thinking. Do not continue to revisit it. Do not allow it to shape your self-perception. Inaccuracy does not deserve continued attention. The mind that clings to false judgments becomes burdened unnecessarily. What must never change is your commitment to your values. Criticism may challenge your actions, but it should not destabilize your principles. If your actions are misaligned with reason, adjust them. If your principles are sound, do not abandon them under pressure. A disciplined mind distinguishes between correcting behavior and surrendering conviction. Many people confuse criticism with invalidation. They believe that being corrected means being diminished. This belief creates resistance to learning. It turns feedback into threat. It transforms every correction into a challenge to identity rather than an opportunity for improvement. When this happens, growth becomes difficult because the mind is more concerned with protection than understanding. You must train yourself to detach identity from evaluation. Your worth is not determined by external judgment. Your character is not defined by isolated criticism. Your capacity for improvement is not limited by someone else's opinion. These external inputs may inform you, but they do not define you unless you allow them to. Begin each morning with this preparation. Remind yourself that during the day you will encounter correction, disagreement, and evaluation. Some of it will be fair, some of it will not. Your task is not to avoid it, but to respond to it with clarity. You will not treat every criticism as truth, nor will you treat every criticism as insult. You will examine it before responding. During the day when criticism arises, observe your immediate emotional response. Notice the impulse to defend, to explain, to reject, or to withdraw. These impulses are natural, but they are not final. Between impulse and action, insert reason. That space allows you to decide how to respond instead of reacting automatically. If the criticism comes from someone who is mistaken, remain calm. There is no benefit in emotional escalation. If the criticism comes from someone who is correct, remain calm. There is no benefit in resistance to truth. In both cases, calmness preserves clarity. Emotional disturbance only obscures judgment. You will also notice that much criticism is not truly about you. It is shaped by the speaker's mood, expectations, limitations, and perspective. When you understand this, you stop taking every judgment personally. You begin to see criticism as information filtered through another mind, rather than absolute truth about your character. At the end of the day, reflect on how you responded to criticism. Identify moments where you reacted defensively without examination. Identify moments where you accepted feedback without evaluation. Identify moments where emotion overruled reason. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe with clarity so correction becomes possible. Then identify moments where you responded with discipline, moments where you paused before reacting, moments where you examined content rather than tone, moments where you accepted truth without resistance or rejected error without emotional weight. These moments are evidence that your mind is capable of balance under pressure. Over time, this practice reshapes your relationship with external judgment. Criticism no longer destabilizes your identity. It becomes something you process rather than absorb. It loses its ability to disturb your inner order because it is no longer treated as authority over your self-understanding. You begin to notice that calmness in the face of criticism is not weakness. It is control. It is the ability to remain governed by reason while external voices attempt to pull you into reaction. It is the ability to maintain internal stability while evaluating external input. This stability is what allows genuine improvement without emotional collapse. At the same time, your willingness to grow increases. Because you are no longer defensive, you can see more clearly where improvement is needed. You are not protecting your identity from correction, you are refining your actions through it. This shift transforms criticism from something feared into something useful. The world will continue to offer opinions about you. Some will be accurate, some will be inaccurate, some will be helpful, some will be careless. You cannot control which ones appear, but you can control how they are received, how they are evaluated, and how they influence your actions. That control is the foundation of inner discipline. When you accept criticism calmly without surrendering your values, you achieve a rare balance. You remain open to truth without becoming unstable. You remain grounded in principle without becoming rigid. You remain responsive to improvement without becoming reactive to judgment. This is the practice of disciplined reception, not rejection of feedback, not blind acceptance of it, but clear evaluation guided by reason. In this state, criticism loses its power to harm and gains its proper role as a tool for refinement. And in that transformation, your character becomes less dependent on external voices and more aligned with rational self-governance. Number 8. Direct your energy toward worthy personal improvement. Your energy is limited, yet your mind behaves as if it is infinite. It scatters attention across matters that do not improve your character, and then it wonders why progress feels slow and inner stability feels fragile. You spend strength on reactions that do not build you, conversations that do not refine you, worries that do not serve you, and comparisons that do not elevate you. In doing so, you exhaust the very force that should be directed toward your own improvement. To direct your energy toward worthy personal improvement is to reclaim responsibility for where your attention goes. It is to recognize that every moment of focus is either strengthening your rational nature or weakening it. There is no neutral use of attention. It either sharpens your judgment or dulls it. It either aligns you with disciplined action or pulls you into distraction. Most people live as if improvement happens passively. They assume time alone will refine them. They assume experience alone will teach them. They assume external events will somehow shape them into better versions of themselves without deliberate effort. But character does not improve through exposure alone. It improves through intentional direction of effort. Without direction, energy dissolves into habit. With direction, energy becomes transformation. Observe how often your daily focus is consumed by things that do not require your participation. You think about what others are doing. You replay conversations that are already finished. You imagine outcomes that are not present. You react mentally to situations that no longer exist or may never occur. Each of these mental movements consumes energy that could have been used for self-correction and rational development. This misdirection of attention is subtle, but its effects accumulate. You feel busy in thought but unchanged in character. You feel active in mind but stagnant in behavior. You feel engaged with life but disconnected from improvement. This happens because your energy is distributed outward instead of concentrated inward where actual change occurs. Personal improvement begins when attention is redirected from external observation to internal examination. Not in a self-absorbed way, but in a disciplined way that evaluates your judgments, your responses, and your actions. The question is not what others are doing, but how you are thinking, how you are reacting, and how you are choosing. Each day presents countless opportunities for improvement, but most are ignored because attention is elsewhere. A moment of impatience appears and passes without correction. A reaction forms and is expressed without examination. A judgment arises and is accepted without testing. These are not minor events, they are the building blocks of character. If they are not addressed, they repeat unchanged. To direct energy toward worthy improvement, you must first define what is worthy. Worthy improvement is not measured by external achievement alone. It is measured by alignment with reason, discipline, and virtue. Anything that strengthens your ability to think clearly, act justly, and remain composed under difficulty is worthy. Anything that distracts from this development is not. Begin each morning by setting this direction clearly. Before engaging with external demands, decide that your energy will not be spent on unnecessary reaction. Decide that your attention will be used deliberately. Decide that each moment of the day will either contribute to your refinement or be recognized and corrected when it does not. This intention alone begins to restructure behavior. During the day, observe where your energy goes without conscious choice. Notice when you become absorbed in matters that do not contribute to your growth. Notice when emotional reactions consume mental space without producing insight. Notice when unnecessary concerns occupy attention that could be directed toward constructive action. Awareness of misdirection is the first step toward correction. When you catch your attention drifting toward what does not serve your improvement, do not react with frustration. Simply redirect it. Return it to what is within your control, your judgments, your responses, your actions. This return is not a single event. It is a repeated discipline. Each return strengthens your ability to govern attention. You will notice that much of what drains your energy comes from unexamined interpretation. A situation is neutral until your mind assigns weight to it. If the interpretation is exaggerated, your energy follows that exaggeration. If the interpretation is unclear, your attention becomes scattered. If the interpretation is unnecessary, your energy is wasted entirely. By examining interpretation before accepting it, you reduce unnecessary expenditure of mental strength. You begin to see that many concerns dissolve when examined closely. They lose importance when brought into contact with reason. What once felt urgent often reveals itself as insignificant when viewed without emotional distortion. Improvement requires consistent return to what is essential, not what is interesting, not what is stimulating, not what is emotionally engaging, but what is essential to your rational development. This requires discipline because the mind naturally prefers stimulation over structure. It prefers distraction over effort. It prefers reaction over reflection. To overcome this tendency, you must train yourself to value internal progress over external activity. A day spent correcting a single judgment is more valuable than a day spent reacting to many external events without reflection. A moment of disciplined response is more valuable than hours of undirected thinking. Improvement is measured by quality of attention, not quantity of activity. As you continue this practice, you will begin to notice that your energy becomes more stable. Instead of being scattered across multiple concerns, it becomes concentrated on fewer but more meaningful areas. Instead of being consumed by reaction, it becomes available for deliberate action. Instead of being depleted by distraction, it becomes directed toward refinement. This concentration of energy produces clarity. With clarity, decisions become simpler. With simplicity, action becomes more direct. With direct action, unnecessary struggle decreases. You begin to experience a sense of order within your mind that was not present when attention was scattered. You will also notice that many external matters lose their grip on your attention. Events that once felt significant no longer dominate your thinking. Opinions that once disturbed you no longer occupy mental space. Situations that once drained your energy no longer hold influence over your inner state. This is not detachment from life. It is refinement of focus. At the end of the day, review where your energy was directed. Identify moments where it was spent on things that did not contribute to your improvement. Identify moments where reaction replaced intention. Identify moments where distraction replaced discipline. Do not judge these moments emotionally. Observe them with clarity so they can be corrected. Then identify moments where your energy was used well, moments where you paused before reacting, moments where you redirected attention from distraction to purpose, moments where you chose reason over impulse. These moments are evidence that your ability to direct energy is already developing. Over time, this practice transforms how you live. You begin to approach each day with awareness of where your energy is going. You become more selective in what you engage with. You become more intentional in how you respond. You become more disciplined in how you think. This is not restriction. It is refinement. You are not reducing your life. You are removing waste from it. You are not limiting your mind. You are focusing it. You are not avoiding experience. You are ensuring that experience contributes to your development rather than dispersing it. When energy is directed toward worthy personal improvement, the mind becomes less reactive and more constructive. You stop living as a collection of scattered responses and begin living as a unified process of rational development. Each moment becomes an opportunity to refine judgment, strengthen discipline, and align action with reason. This is the essence of directed living, not passive existence, not reactive behavior, but intentional use of mental energy toward the cultivation of character. And when this becomes consistent, improvement is no longer something you occasionally pursue. It becomes the structure of how you live each day. Number 9. Practice solitude to discover your true nature. You are rarely alone in the way your mind operates. Even when your body is physically isolated, your thoughts remain crowded with voices that are not your own. Opinions you have absorbed, reactions you have inherited, expectations you have never questioned, and judgments you have never examined continue speaking inside your awareness. This internal noise is so constant that you begin to mistake it for your true self. But none of this is your true nature. Your true nature is revealed only when you remove unnecessary influence and observe your mind without interference. Solitude is not emptiness, it is removal of distortion. It is the condition in which your thinking is no longer shaped by immediate reaction to others. Without solitude, you do not see yourself clearly. You only see your responses to external pressure. Most people avoid solitude because it forces confrontation with their own unexamined mind. In the presence of others, attention is distributed outward and the inner disorder is temporarily masked. Social interaction becomes a distraction from self-awareness. Constant input becomes a way to avoid silence, but avoidance does not remove disorder. It only delays recognition of it. When you enter solitude, the first thing you encounter is not truth but noise. Thoughts appear without structure, memories surface without invitation, judgments arise without clarity, emotional residues from interactions replay themselves in loops. This is not failure, this is exposure. What was previously hidden by distraction now becomes visible through stillness. You must not react to this inner noise with frustration. You must observe it with disciplined attention. The mind, in its untrained state, behaves like a restless field of impressions. It repeats concerns that have no current relevance. It replays conversations that are already complete. It anticipates outcomes that have not arrived. In solitude, these patterns become visible without disguise. This visibility is the beginning of understanding your true nature. Not the surface identity shaped by external approval, but the underlying structure of your judgments, reactions, and assumptions. Without solitude, you remain unaware of how much of your thinking is automatic repetition rather than rational choice. To practice solitude correctly is to withdraw not only from people, but from unnecessary engagement with impressions. It is to observe the mind without immediately participating in every thought it produces. You are not required to follow every mental movement. You are required to examine whether it deserves continuation. Begin each morning with intentional solitude before external demands begin shaping your attention. Before you interact with the world, observe the state of your mind without interference. Do not rush into activity as a way to avoid self-observation. Sit with your thoughts long enough to recognize their patterns. This early discipline establishes clarity before confusion accumulates. In this state, apply a simple distinction. Ask what in your thoughts is derived from reason and what is derived from reaction. Reason produces clarity and consistency. Reaction produces repetition and instability. When you identify reaction, do not suppress it. Observe it until its influence weakens. When you identify reason, strengthen it through attention. Throughout the day, solitude can be practiced internally even while engaged externally. This is the discipline of returning to yourself while remaining in the world. When conversation ends, do not carry it endlessly in your mind. When events occur, do not allow them to dominate internal space. Return repeatedly to observation of your own thinking rather than continuous engagement with external narratives. You will notice that much of your internal activity is not directed by intention but by habit. You think about what others might think. You replay judgments that were never questioned. You anticipate responses that may never occur. These patterns create an illusion of mental activity while producing no real understanding. Solitude reveals this illusion clearly. When you are alone and not distracted, you begin to see how often your mind seeks external reference points. It looks for validation in imagined reactions. It constructs scenarios based on fear or desire. It attaches emotional weight to events that are not present. Without solitude, these patterns remain invisible because they are constantly reinforced by external stimulation. The purpose of solitude is not withdrawal from life, but correction of perception. It allows you to separate what is essential in your thinking from what is unnecessary. Essential thinking is grounded in reason, focused on what is within your control and directed toward virtue. Unnecessary thinking is reactive, speculative, and dependent on external input. As you continue this practice, you will begin to notice a shift. The mind becomes less compelled to react immediately to every impression. There is a growing space between thought and response. In that space, clarity becomes possible. You are no longer forced to follow every mental impulse. You can observe it, evaluate it, and decide whether it deserves continuation. This ability reveals your true nature more clearly than any external achievement. Your true nature is not your reputation, not your social identity, not your roles, and not your accumulated opinions. It is your capacity for rational judgment and self-governance. Solitude exposes whether you are guided by this capacity or whether you are controlled by unexamined mental patterns. At first, solitude may feel uncomfortable because it removes the distraction that has been masking internal disorder. But discomfort is not a sign of harm, it is a sign of exposure. What was previously ignored is now visible. What was previously avoided is now encountered directly. This encounter is necessary for understanding. When discomfort arises in solitude, do not escape it through distraction. Observe it. Ask what judgment is producing it. Ask what assumption is sustaining it. Often discomfort dissolves when its origin is examined clearly. What remains after examination is either truth that can be accepted or distortion that can be released. In solitude, you also begin to see the difference between your essential self and your reactive self. The reactive self is shaped by external conditions. It changes with praise or criticism. It fluctuates with success or failure. The essential self remains consistent in its capacity for reasoned judgment, regardless of external variation. Solitude strengthens awareness of this distinction. To deepen this practice, set aside time each day where no external input is allowed. No unnecessary conversation, no passive consumption of opinions, no engagement with distractions that do not contribute to understanding. This is not isolation from life, it is training in clarity of mind. Without this training, external influence remains dominant over internal reasoning. At the end of each period of solitude, reflect on what was observed. Identify recurring patterns in your thinking. Identify unnecessary reactions. Identify judgments that appeared without evidence. Identify moments of clarity where reason was active without distortion. This reflection converts observation into understanding. Over time, solitude becomes less about withdrawal and more about recognition. You begin to recognize your thoughts as they arise, rather than being absorbed by them. You begin to recognize patterns before they develop into reactions. You begin to recognize the difference between mental noise and rational thought. This recognition is the foundation of self-mastery. As this discipline strengthens, your dependence on external validation decreases. Your need for constant stimulation decreases. Your susceptibility to reactive judgment decreases. What increases is clarity, stability, and awareness of what belongs to you and what does not. You begin to live less as a response to the world and more as an observer and director of your own mind. True nature is not discovered in distraction, it is revealed in observation without interference. When external noise is reduced and internal awareness is strengthened, you begin to see yourself not as a collection of reactions, but as a capacity for reasoned choice. This capacity is always present, but it is often obscured. Solitude removes the obscuring layer. It does not create your true nature. It reveals it, and once revealed, it becomes possible to live from it more consistently, not perfectly, but more deliberately, more consciously, and more aligned with rational understanding. This is the discipline of solitude, not escape from the world, but return to the mind that observes it clearly. And in that return, you begin to see that what you were searching for externally was always dependent on an internal condition that only solitude can uncover. Number 10. Dedicate your life to virtue, not applause. Most people live as if being seen is the same as being right. They measure their worth through reaction, approval, attention, and recognition from others who are just as uncertain as they are. They build their decisions around imagined audiences, and in doing so they slowly abandon the only authority that can actually guide a human life: reasoned judgment aligned with virtue. To dedicate your life to virtue and not applause is to reverse this entire pattern. It is to stop treating external approval as a compass and begin treating it as something irrelevant to the quality of your character. Applause is not proof of correctness. Silence is not proof of failure. Praise is not proof of virtue. Criticism is not proof of error. All of these are external reactions that do not determine the state of your inner life unless you allow them to. You have likely noticed how often your thinking shifts when you imagine how others will respond. A decision feels different when you picture approval. A different weight appears when you anticipate judgment. Your sense of right action becomes unstable because it is being shaped by outcomes you cannot control. This is how the mind loses its center. It begins to orbit external perception instead of internal reason. Virtue does not depend on being witnessed. It depends on being chosen. A just action is just even if no one sees it. A disciplined action is disciplined even if it is misunderstood. A rational decision is rational even if it is ignored. If your commitment to what is right changes based on who is watching, then your commitment is not to virtue but to appearance. Most people never examine this contradiction. They assume that being recognized for good behavior is the same as being good. But recognition is not moral substance. It is social reaction. It reflects perception, not truth. If you depend on applause, you will eventually shape your behavior to produce applause rather than truth. And when that happens, your life becomes performance instead of practice. You must learn to separate your actions from their reception. What you do belongs to you. How others respond belongs to them. The value of your action is determined by its alignment with reason, not by its reception in the minds of others. If you confuse these categories, you will constantly adjust yourself to external expectations instead of internal principles. Begin each day by reminding yourself that applause is not your task. Your task is to act according to what is right within your control. You will not control recognition. You will not control interpretation. You will not control approval, but you will always control intention, judgment, and action. These are the only elements that define your moral direction. Throughout the day, observe how often your choices are influenced by imagined observers. You may speak differently when you think you are being evaluated. You may hesitate when you fear judgment. You may exaggerate behavior when you seek approval. These adjustments are subtle, but they reveal that your attention is still partially governed by external perception. When you notice this influence, do not suppress it forcefully, simply recognize it clearly. Ask whether the action you are about to take aligns with reason or with desire for recognition. If it aligns with reason, proceed regardless of imagined reaction. If it aligns only with approval seeking, pause and reconsider. This distinction is essential for restoring internal authority. Applause often rewards what is visible, not what is valuable. It responds to presentation, not intention. It is drawn to outcomes, not process. If you structure your life around it, you will gradually prioritize what is seen over what is right. This is how people drift away from integrity without noticing it. They begin optimizing for perception instead of principle. Virtue, by contrast, requires no audience. It is complete in itself. It does not increase or decrease based on observation. It is measured by alignment between reason and action. When you act justly, you have already completed the purpose of the action. External reaction adds nothing to it. This does not mean you reject all recognition or live in opposition to others. It means you no longer treat recognition as a guide for decision-making. You can receive it without dependence. You can ignore it without resentment. You can observe it without being shaped by it. This neutrality is what preserves freedom of judgment. There will be moments when doing what is right produces no acknowledgement. There will also be moments when incorrect actions receive approval. If you are governed by applause, you will be pulled toward distortion. If you are governed by virtue, you will remain steady regardless of external fluctuation. Stability of character depends on this choice. At times, you will feel the tension between what is right and what is rewarded. This is where discipline is tested. The mind will suggest compromise in exchange for recognition. It will offer ease in exchange for approval. It will propose adjustment in exchange for acceptance. If you follow these suggestions blindly, you will slowly detach from your principles without realizing it. The disciplined response is to return to reason. Ask what action aligns with fairness, clarity, and self-control. Ask what choice maintains integrity even if it is unnoticed. Ask what behavior you would still endorse if no one ever evaluated it. These questions remove the influence of external validation and restore internal clarity. In the morning, prepare your mind for invisibility. Not literal invisibility, but moral independence from observation. Decide in advance that your actions will not be dictated by who might see them. This preparation weakens the hold of approval seeking before it appears during the day. At night, review your actions not by asking how they were received, but by asking whether they were governed by reason. Did you act from principle or from desire for approval? Did you choose based on what was right or based on what would be praised? This distinction is where character becomes visible to yourself. Over time, this practice reveals how much unnecessary tension comes from dependence on recognition. When you are no longer preoccupied with how you are perceived, mental space becomes available for clearer thinking. You begin to act more directly, without the hesitation created by imagined judgment. You also begin to notice that applause is inconsistent. It changes with mood, context, and audience. What is praised in one situation may be ignored in another. If your stability depends on it, your stability will always fluctuate. If your stability depends on virtue, it becomes consistent regardless of environment. The aim is not to become indifferent to people, but to become independent of their approval as a measure of your worth. You can care about others without surrendering your judgment to them. You can listen without obeying. You can engage without depending. You can participate in society without losing internal authority. When virtue becomes your standard, your decisions become simpler. You no longer ask how something will appear. You ask whether it is right. You no longer evaluate actions by their reception. You evaluate them by their alignment with reason. This shift removes unnecessary complexity from life and replaces it with clarity of direction. There will still be external reactions. There will still be praise and criticism, but they will no longer function as governing forces. They will become background noise rather than guiding signals. Your attention will remain anchored in what is within your control. To dedicate your life to virtue is to commit to this anchoring without exception. It is to choose reason over reaction, principle over approval, and integrity over image. It is to accept that the only true measure of your life is not how it is seen, but how it is lived according to rational and disciplined choice. When this commitment becomes stable, you stop living as an actor seeking applause and begin living as a rational being guided by principle. And in that shift, you recover something that external recognition can never provide, a life that remains steady regardless of who is watching.